Okay, the chalkboard is now cleaned off. It's go time. Okay guys, driveway is clean, we're ready. Lesson 32. Going to talk about compound interest, which involves money. One of my favorite things to talk about, of course, is money always. So compound interest is going to be part of this chapter because first of all it involves exponents, but second of all, eventually it's going to involve logarithms. Going to keep it fairly simple for this lesson, and the next lesson we'll start using logarithms and get a little bit more complicated. So first, what is compound interest? Well, when you put money in the bank and collect interest on it, there's a formula for that, and this is the compound interest formula. It's right here, so you're going to want to copy that down. I'm going to tell you what all those letters mean in just a second. So in the meantime, if you want to copy that down, there's your formula. Definitely something you're going to use in pre-calc. So if you need to pause the video, you can. So now let me go over here and tell you what all the letters mean. All right, so the A in that formula is the final amount of money you end up with after using that formula. The P is the initial amount of money that you put in, whatever amount you put in your account. The R is the rate that you're putting the money in. It's going to be given to you as a percentage, all right, your interest rate they call it. You want to convert it to a decimal when you use it in the formula. So R is going to be your interest rate as a decimal. N, this is kind of not tricky, but this is probably the more complicated part here. N is how often the interest is calculated in a year. All right. Now, you might say, well, isn't it just calculated once a year? Well, not always. It depends on the financial institution. All right. So let's go over and talk about some different ways interest might be calculated at different institutions. One of the ways you'll see interest calculated is what's called annual. Annual means one time a year. So if you were dealing with something with annual interest, you would put a 1 in for N in that formula right there. Next could be semi-annual. Semi-annual means it's being calculated 2 times a year, so you would put a 2 in for N up there. Sometimes institutions calculate your interest quarterly, which means 4 times a year, so you would put a 4 in for N up there. And then the most common way, especially at banks, if you have a savings account, this is how they do it. Your interest is calculated monthly, and there's 12 months in a year, so you get 12 times your interest is calculated. All right, so 12 would go in for N right there. So there is compound interest, the formula, what everything stands for in the formula, and different values of N that you'll come across in different problems. All right, so now let me go ahead and show you our first example. Let's say you had $4,000 and you invested it into an account at 9% interest, compounded monthly for 5 years. Oh, by the way, let's go back up here for a second. I forgot to write down that your T value is time. I hope we could probably figure that out, but T is time in that formula. So you need to know the time as well. All right, so 5 years. So here's going to be the setup over here. Notice I've put the $4,000, the initial amount, in for P. I took my 9% and changed it to a decimal and made it 0.09. I put 12 in for N because my N value is how often the interest is calculated in a year. And in this problem, we said it was compounded monthly. And then I put 5 in for T, the time, because it was for 5 years. So let's see how much money we would have if we invested it in this account for 5 years at 9% interest. Now, 9% interest is actually really high. You're not going to see that in very few accounts. All right. So let me show you the calculator work for that. Let me get it to a new spot and I'll show you that. Okay, so when you put this into your calculator, you want to do it all at once. You don't want to do it piece by piece. You end up making mistakes. All right, so the formula, our initial amount was 4,000. We have a parenthesis, and then it's 1 plus. Now we're going to put a fraction in here because it's 0.09 divided by 12. So I'm going to use the fraction button. So alpha F1, we know that button. We've used that before. Throw a fraction in there. 0.09 goes in the top. 12 in the bottom because it was calculated monthly. You got to arrow over, close out your parenthesis, hit your exponent button, your caret button right there, and raise that to the 5th power. And then we're going to hit enter, and it's going to give us our answer. Now, we're dealing with money, and if there's no rounding instructions, you want to round to the nearest whole penny. And there is what we get on the calculator. Now, my calculator is giving me my answer in scientific notation. I'm not sure if yours did that or not, but that E3 right there tells us to move our decimal point to the right 3 places. It's the same as times 10 to the third, if you remember from science class. And I think we talked about scientific notation. We did, because it came up in sequences and series when we were doing stuff with geometric. All right, so that means move the decimal point over 3 places to the right, and then round to the nearest penny. So your final answer here should be $4,152.27. All right, let's do one more. All right, second example, and it's actually our last one because I'm not going to go any further than this. If you want to pause the video and try this, we have $2,000 invested at 5% interest. We're compounding our interest quarterly for 15 years. All right, so go ahead and pause and try that. I will then show you the setup and the solution, and if you have questions, you can certainly let me know. So here would be the setup for that one. $2,000 is my initial investment. 5% interest, 0.05 on the top there. I put a 4 in for N because our interest was calculated quarterly. That's 4 times a year. Raised it to the 15th power. Put that in the calculator all at once, just like the last one. My calculator gave it to me in scientific notation again, so I had to move the decimal over 3 places. And I rounded to the nearest penny, and I got $2,321.94. So there is compound interest. Now, the word compounded can kind of be substituted with the word calculated. Calculated monthly, compounded monthly. All right, it's kind of a fancy name for calculating. All right, now what's different in the next lesson is this. We're going to be using the same formula, but the difference is going to be we're going to solve for t. I'm going to give you the initial amount. I'm going to give you how much money is in the account now, the final amount. I'm going to give you the interest rate and how often it's calculated, and we're going to find how long it took for the money to get to that point. That's going to require using a logarithm. So that's where we're going next in lesson 33.